from across the country who want to shine a light on what is working in rural America and on what kind of strategic investment and policy would help to improve rural economic development results. We organized this series, the America's Rural Opportunity, as one of those shining a light efforts. Infrastructure today is our topic, infrastructure fueling rural development. And infrastructure has gotten a lot of press lately, as most of you know, and in no small part due to the focus on it in the last presidential election campaign. When you think of infrastructure, you're likely to, in your brain, get pictures of roads and bridges and that sort of mystical network of pipelines and wires and whatever that run above and below ground that make it easier to run our lives and our homes and our businesses. We have a lot of infrastructure in this country that meets that definition and that has aged beyond its predicted life and is thus in need of serious repair or replacement. This aging and ailing infrastructure represents a serious challenge, as we all know, but it also represents an opportunity for employment and economic activity. Now, all the rural community and economic development people I know across the country think that what qualifies an infrastructure in rural of roads and bridges and lines. So to give you a quick sense this morning of why and what that means, let me introduce a member of our partner, the Rural Development Innovation Group, Connie Stewart. Connie Stewart is Executive Director of the California Center for Rural Policy, which is based at Humboldt State University in Arcata, California. I might also mention that Connie, several years back, served as mayor and as a longtime city council member for city or town? City of Arcata, and worked for a California state representative. So Connie knows rural infrastructure from many difficult angles. Connie?
Thank you, and thank you, Janet. First off, let me say a few more words about the Rural Development Innovation Group. A listing of our members is on the back of the handout you have today. We're a group of seasoned practitioners, intermediaries, and funders that are deeply engaged in rural economic development from across the country. We began meeting in 2016 with an aim to lift up a rural opportunity agenda by surfacing and sharing innovative approaches and to strengthen rural economies, families, and communities. We also aim to increase the understanding of what's working and why it's working, and to accelerate and spread creative and proven approaches to our rural places. Our goal is really to help understand how to more effectively invest in rural communities with the resources that are out here in the world. And in the past, much of rural infrastructure has been designed around how to get a road or get goods to service areas. So it was about manufacturers and farmers trying to figure out how to get their goods elsewhere. Raw materials, water, energy needed to get from remote areas of the country to populated areas of the country. So in the past, when we discussed infrastructure, we were talking about roads, pipes, transmission lines. And although we still need those, and we need to upgrade them, as Janet said, nowadays when we talk about rural infrastructure, we're also including broadband deployment, which can better lead to educational opportunities for both youth and adults, better economic growth, and improved health care for regions. We're also talking about building commercial kitchens that meet health and safety standards so mom and pops can start manufacturing startups in our communities. And we're talking about renovating downtowns and preserving culture so that we can develop a more robust economy. Unfortunately, public funding for rural infrastructure is under threat right now, and its benefits are really misunderstood. Good infrastructure planning, by its very nature, requires investing in something that will benefit the future in ways that we really can't guess. Today, we're going to hear stories of how rural communities are finding resources to build infrastructure and build robust economies and have good partnerships with urban communities. We've asked these panelists to join us today, but they are just a sample of the many people in rural communities that are working to build similar infrastructure and to create a robust future. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Connie. Before we get started, we do want to acknowledge and thank all the organizations that have provided inaugural support for this America's Rural Opportunity Series. Besides the Aspen Institute Community Strategies Group, these include the Northern Forest Center, the U.S. Endowment for Forestry and Communities, Encourage Community Foundation in Wisconsin, represented on today's panel, Lore Foundation, which partners with rural communities in the Intermountain West, the Northwest Area Foundation, and as of a few weeks ago, the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation, as well as all the members of the Rural Development Innovation Group. Now, if you want to share your thoughts during today's discussion and send in questions or thoughts or comments, please do so. Send a message using hashtag rural innovation, hashtag rural innovation. And to learn, get more updates, share your stories of rural innovation, we always welcome you to visit us at as.pn/rural or follow us on Twitter at Rural Innovators. So let's get started. As Connie mentioned, we have 3 stories of rural infrastructure innovation today. The way we're going to do this is our moderator is going to queue up each story in turn and then ask the group some of her probing questions. At the end, we will then have time for questions at the end from those of you in the room as well as those of you who are watching via live stream. And once again, you send your questions at any time during the talk, and we'll save them up for the question period at any time at hashtag rural innovation. So I want to introduce Nancy Marshall-Genzer, who will be moderating and probing today's panel. Nancy is a senior reporter for Marketplace, working from the Washington, D.C. Bureau. Before joining Marketplace, she worked at NPR, at Monitor Radio, and NBC Radio and Television, so she's gotten around the media world. In addition, we're also delighted to report that Nancy knows a few things about rural America. She was born in Boone, Iowa. She was raised in Averill Park, New York. Averill Park, thank you for the correction.
I know you've all heard of it.
Averill Park, New York. And she attended college at the Great Ohio University, not Ohio State, the Great Ohio University in Athens, Ohio, Athens itself being a hotbed of rural innovation. So Nancy claims to like to learn something new every day. Let's see if we can help. Nancy, I hand it to you.
All right, go Bobcats. So first we're going to be chatting with Justin Taylor. And Justin is the former town supervisor of the town of Clayton, New York. And I know personally what a gorgeous place that is. It is so gorgeous that I spent part of my vacation there a year ago. And it's a beautiful place. Justin, why don't we start? Just tell me a little bit about the geography. And gosh, I mean, you're right up next to Canada.
Well, we are. Clayton is a community, has a population of about 5,100. According to the 2010 census, and a population that is now growing. We cover 104 square miles. We are right on the Canadian border, literally, and my township borders a Canadian township. So when you look out our windows, we can look right into Canada. So we are on the northern border of the United States, the northern border of New York, located right on the St. Lawrence River.
And what are the big local economic drivers? I mean, from my experience, I would say tourism, because you have a huge, beautiful, gotta go there, antique boat museum.
Right.
Which is a blast.
It is. And I will say that tourism has been the #1 economic driver, I think, for 100 years in our community. Back in the Gilded Age, folks would take the trains out of New York City, go to the grand hotels in the Thousand Islands, and enjoy their summers there. When the grand hotels burned down, when the trains stopped running to northern New York, the economy and the tourism kind of dipped down. But our economic drivers is still tourism. Fort Drum, home of the 10th Mountain Division. But tourism is our #1 driver in our community. And our proximity to Canada makes it very important because we're close to Ottawa, which is Canada's nation's capital. And so we depend tremendously on that trade back and forth, the tourism industry back and forth between the U.S. and Canada.
Yeah, just to help you envision, his area is called the Thousand Islands region. And it's gorgeous, and you hop from beautiful small town to beautiful small town. And I don't know that there really are 1,000 islands.
No,
Canada says
there's,
there are not.
well, I disagree with them. Respectfully, I think there's over 1,700 if you
Wow.
count all the islands.
Now, Justin, you sort of touched on this. The economy was really booming, right, 100 years ago or
100
so?
years
And
ago.
then what happened after that?
Well, I think that the tourism and our community started to decline, and I have a perspective of it from the 60s and the 70s. And, people would come to Clayton and the Thousand Islands to fish. They'd come to see Bull Castle. And I think that our town got a little tired. And I think many of the communities along the St. Lawrence River did the same thing. And we were kind of restricted from any future development in our community because of our aging infrastructure. And thank goodness for the wisdom and the foresight of some of our local elected officials, and they said, in order for us to attract people to the community, we have to improve our infrastructure. We have to fix our sewer systems, and we have to fix our water systems. And the water system started in 1980 with a complete renovation of water, and USDA, Rural Development, played a significant part of that. But our sewer system was in dire need of upgrading. And our permitting agencies in New York State did not allow us any new development that had to rely on that sewer plant. And the village, which had the sewer operation in the, I guess, late 1990s, early 2000s, sought funding to renovate that, and were successful in planning and getting the infrastructure going from the sewer perspective.
And you had to do that before you could build a new hotel or renovate, right?
I think that the elected officials at that point saw that if we didn't have the infrastructure, we couldn't have any new development. And we didn't have the money locally to build a $4.8 million sewer renovation project. So our community looked out to our funding partners. So that was pretty much USDA Rural Development in their infrastructures program. We did get some state funding through the Environmental Facilities Program, EFC. But that was critical. Without the infrastructure, we could not have added any new development in our community. And they were very clear about that. No new homes, no new businesses, no new destination hotel resorts, which the community thought they wanted, without improving the infrastructure.
And how, I mean, is it like one project begets another? How did the development sort of build on itself?
Well, we planned for the infrastructure, but at the same time we were learning about infrastructure and grants and loans and programs like that. We came across some programs. There was a Main Street program. I think that might have been one of the first state programs that was funded. We got two $500,000 matching grant programs to help clean up the facades of our downtown. We had vacant stores in the 1990s. We had vacant storefronts, and they were seeing their age. They were really aging buildings, and so we got those two programs, which got the businesses and the folks in our community that were coming there saying, this is really a nice community because they've got nice facades, they've got nice storefronts, and the business folks bought into that.
You know, it's funny when you say you had boarded up buildings, I just can't imagine that because this town is a jewel now. I mean, it really is. But why was the downtown revitalization so important for Clayton?
Well, we saw the downtown, and it's located right on the St. Lawrence River on a little peninsula. I think if I got the slides here, you can see there's a picture of the west side of Clayton, which shows essentially the whole village is surrounded by water. And the downtown is located right on the St. Lawrence River. And it was showing its age. And we got some good wins with those facade and Main Street programs. People were excited about them. We had good buy-in, we had good trust The community liked it, the businesses liked it, the funding agencies liked it, and then we expanded that from the Main Street programs to what we call our Riverwalk program. We wanted to have a Riverwalk that surrounded the whole peninsula, so we have Riverwalk 1, Riverwalk 2, 2.5, 3.0, and the Riverwalk, we wanted to be able to connect the whole downtown on a walkway. And so we applied for our first grant. It was a $600,000 grant with the New York State Department of State Waterfront Development Program. We got that grant, but we needed to match 50% of it.
Ouch.
So we needed to come up with $300,000. Well, in the early 2000s, one of our main manufacturing plants, Frink Snowplow, had gone out of business. They left the community, and they were located on the east side of the village, 8 acres, 1,254 feet, right on the St. Lawrence River. It was prime real estate. And so we sought the community's input, and the community said to us, we want public access to the waterfront. We want a hotel, a good quality hotel. We want jobs, and did I say jobs?
You did.
Jobs. And we want a destination for folks to want to come to Clayton and the Thousand Islands. And so we created a concept master plan, the town, the village. We formed what's known as the Clayton Local Development Corporation, and our Chamber of Commerce all worked together collectively and trying to get organizations, different organizations that may have different competing goals together and have one focus was not a very hard sell here. But we created the concept master plan, and we followed that plan. And so our first phase was the Riverwalk. $600,000 Riverwalk program, but we needed to come up with $300,000 in match. And the taxpayers didn't have that. But what we did have was that piece of property that we had taken over for tax sale, the 8 acres that was known as Frink Snowplow. And we used $300,000 of the Riverwalk section as a matching grant, the easement value. So we didn't have to use cash. And that was a new aspect for the funding agencies to say, didn't think we could do that. They asked their legal counsels and they said, yep, sounds like a good plan. So we did Riverwalk 1, we did Riverwalk 2, we did Riverwalk 2.5, and we're now working on Riverwalk 3. So we've found a good program there.
I'm going to have to go back and see that. Justin, we're going to wrap up a little bit, but before we do, what top 2 pieces of advice would you give to maybe someone in the audience or a community leader who is thinking about pursuing some infrastructure investments?
Plan, plan, plan. Have a good plan, communicate with all your partners, local, state, federal officials, and have great people that are working for you, and listen to the public. Listen to what the public has to say. If you look at the slide that's up on the screen right now, you'll see that was the snowplow manufacturing plant on the shoreline of the St. Lawrence River. And we tore that down. We used municipal forces to do that. We ended up cleaning it all up. There is what it looks like vacant. It was a great parking lot. People loved it as a parking lot because they could go down there and look at the St. Lawrence River, but it didn't meet our goal of private sector, some private sector donations, destination hotel, and this is what's there right now from the shoreline, which is the Harbor Hotel. And without all of the grants that worked together, I think we had 11 different funding sources, was coordinating it, putting it all together, and our staff, the town staff, the village staff, the local development corporation, working together brought all of these programs together. Our spreadsheet for keeping track of it was 3 feet wide are 3 feet tall and 12 feet long. And so when you track this, we used to roll that out on the table, and the funding agencies would say, this is mind-boggling. Well, if the funding agencies thought it was mind-boggling, how would you like to have managed that?
No, thank you. Justin, thank you so much. I hope everybody goes to Clayton, New York.
Antique Boat Museum.
Yes.
World's largest, or North America's largest freshwater display of antique boats, and the Clayton Opera House in Clayton. So.
Just go there. But we're going to go across the country to Northern California now. And we're going to talk to Eric Cutright and Barry Talley. Did I say that right, Barry?
Tally.
I used to live in Oregon, so I can relate to you guys too. And I drove up the coast from California to Oregon. If anyone has ever done that, you know how gorgeous their community is. It's just amazing. And Eric, well, actually, since you live there, why don't you tell us a little more about the geography of it?
Yeah, we're in the region which I like to call far Northern California. You go to Northern California, and then you go another 6 hours north, and then you get there. We are, within, 50 miles of the Oregon border. We are inland from the coast. So a lot of people know the Redwoods. Well, you go a little bit east from the Redwoods, you'll get there. We're in the beautiful Six Rivers and Klamath National Forest. And this is the ancestral territory of the Kirwan tribe, who's my employer. It's river country. The Kirwan tribe, they focus on the rivers, they fish the salmon. And it's also what was the center of the California gold rush, which historically had a hugely negative impact on the native peoples of California. In fact, sometimes it's called the California Holocaust. They estimate 80% of the Kirwan people were killed during the gold rush.
Wow. So the demographics now, tell me about the demographics today.
Demographics today, there's Kirwan tribal members, there's also tribal members from several other neighboring tribes, and there's a lot of non-natives there. There was a lot of forestry in the past, not so much now. But there's government workers, there's gold miners still. So it's kind of a both native and non-native mixed community.
And what are the local drivers for the economy?
It's in the past, it's historically been resource extraction, whether that was gold or timber, and it's trying to change now. The biggest employers are the government agencies, the Kirwan tribal government, the Forest Service, the California Department of Transportation. There's also a lot of small-scale private agriculture, some vineyards, and a lot of people that don't have jobs. Very economically depressed area.
And you are specifically going to talk about an amazing kind of a broadband project that you were in charge of, right?
Yes, I started working for the Kirwan tribe back in 2008. And the community that I want to talk about is called Orleans, like New Orleans without the new. And I visited Orleans on my first day on the job. And I discovered that there's no cell service there. Still, there's no cell company that's decided to grace us. There's no high-speed internet, at least at the time. And even the landline phones failed on a regular basis. The whole town would lose dial tone. But just imagine picking up the phone and you got nothing. And that was the state of affairs. That was expected. And it was so hard to describe. I like to use the word frontier. It's almost beyond rural. It's hard to imagine. You think you're visiting Alaska or a third world country. The need was identified almost right away. There's a tribally run health clinic in town, and the doctor would come to the tribal council every month and say, I can't dial 911. What am I supposed to do to help my patients when they have an emergency? And we looked for outside help. We asked the phone company to provide service. They weren't interested. We asked for outside providers. We worked with, during the stimulus package, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, we worked on 11 different projects to try to get someone to come in and help us serve the community, and no outsider was interested in helping us. And so in 2011, we said the only way that we're going to ever get good service is if we do it ourselves. And that's what we chose to do. And so we applied for and received a USDA Community Connect grant, which is under the Rural Development Program. And We used that to bring a fiber optic cable in from a nearby phone company it wasn't the phone company that served Orleans, but it was a nearby one, Siskiyou Telephone. We ran the fiber into town, and we put up a wireless broadband tower, and we are serving wireless internet now to the community. Now, I described that in just a couple of sentences, but that was a 4-year project. We didn't launch until 2015. The project, it was huge for the community. The community really wanted good service. We had community support all the way. When you're doing a project like this, the first thing I'd say that you need is regional support. You can't do it by yourself, in the sense that we needed to provide the service to our own community, but we had to work with our regional partners. We ended up working with Connie Stewart's program, California Center for Rural Policy. We worked with several different regional phone companies and broadband companies. We worked with our partner tribes in the region. And you have to develop this, as well as developing partnerships with consultants and engineering firms and construction people, because we didn't have the expertise. How do you run a fiber optic cable? We also had to work very closely with the government agencies in the region. We needed a permit from the Forest Service and from the California Department of Transportation, and all the various agencies that manage the roads and the lands. You have to just develop relationships with all of them to develop the project.
And what was the tribe's role?
The tribe's role, the tribe is now the internet provider, and we're also the one that applied for and managed the grant. We were the fiscal agent for the project, and we hired the engineers, we hired the construction agencies, we managed the project all the way through. And to serve both the tribal people and the non-natives in the community.
And Barry, I want to bring you in to talk more concretely about how the new internet access is being used by the tribes. Has it just changed life
Well, it
dramatically?
has for me, but I just wanted to go back to the Klamath River is our main infrastructure that's been there forever. And we've been there forever too, managing that land base and the river and all of our relations there, which we're also related to the Yuroks who are downriver, and they're on the coast. And it's 2 hours to the nearest stoplight. It's 2 hours to the nearest shopping. It's, I'd say mainstream America would say we're very remote. However, we feel like in fact, we know we live in the center of the world, and that is where it all started. And so that very remoteness is also an asset for us, because it kept our people very connected to the environment and to our cultural heritage. So people who've lived around there still have connections to our traditions, and we are the Fix the World people, and we still have yearly world renewal ceremonies, and we're a living culture. We're still a native culture that has ceremonies and traditions that are strong. But it is also very got some socioeconomic problems. There's a lot of drug use. There's a lot of joblessness. There's poverty. There's domestic violence. There's probably a sadness and a loss of morale for the Native peoples, and so these broadband has I think interjected hope, and it's given us an ability to preserve and provide access to our culture to people who live outside of our community, because it is very hard to get to geographically. We have geographic challenges. We don't have a high school in our community. Our kids have to be transported either 50 miles upriver or downriver to get to school, so it's like an hour to get to school. It's a long day. And this year we had road closures and black mold, which closed the schools for weeks. And so with the internet connection, they've been able to stay on track and be able to graduate. And there's opportunities for education for our people, because there's no public transportation to universities that are 2 hours away and without a job and without a car. It's been a real challenge. So I think the main thing that this has brought to us is the ability to see a future that's brighter.
You know, Barry, I remember we were talking on the phone last week, and you were saying it used to be you had to like drive 2 hours to go take a test online. So now people are able to take the tests right in their school, right? I mean, when you say it's interjected hope, how is it done that? Is that an example of how it's interjected
Well, it
hope?
is in that you can do things from home that you don't have to do the drive, and you can have access to the greater world through the internet, which was not available before. And so it is really nice to be able to stream Netflix and do things that other people really take for granted.
But you were also saying that the web has enabled you to reach out to tribal members around the world, right?
Right.
And so maybe is that
Well, I'd
providing
like to talk a
inspiration?
little bit about the Signook Digital Library, Archives, and Museum that we've created as part of the broadband initiative. It was actually part of originally the USDA AFRI, which is Food and Research Initiative, was one of the objectives for that. And so we were supposed to be collecting research papers. We've worked with many different universities and organizations where the researchers come in and do research. Well, we wanted to provide a central location for that research. But the community that we've got together and our advisory committee really see that the need is for putting on we have developed a K-12 curriculum. So have that available, have history, photographs available, have a central location we have a herbarium that's associated with our People Center and our Department of Natural Resources where we collect plant species, so it's a plant library, but we're collecting all that information so that we can track climate change and different things, and also just be the authorities for our own culture, whereas before it used to be outside universities or museums would have the information. We want to be the owners of our own culture and provide access to our people who live all over, but also to the public and just in general, just have a place that's central and collects our information.
Well, Barry, thank you. Eric, thank you. I want to visit you too, although I know it'd be a little more of a challenge than Clayton, but it's a beautiful part of the country. Kelly, last but not least, Kelly Ryan. She's from Wisconsin, the geographic center of Wisconsin, and I relate everything to Milwaukee, or it was about a year ago. So remind me, how far of a drive is it from Milwaukee?
We are in the exact center of the state, so it's about 2.5 hours northwest of Milwaukee.
And Kelly, we were talking before the panel started, and you were saying we've been doing rural development for 17 years now. You're going to tell us about one specific project, but tell us about your history.
I am going to tell you about one specific project and a little different tack on thinking about infrastructure. So I have been in my position at Encourage for 20 years. And over the course of that 20 years, our economy has changed dramatically, much like many rural areas. We were home to the headquarters of a Fortune 500 company that produced paper. We were the smallest city in the U.S. to be home to a headquarters for over a century in Wisconsin Rapids. And that company was sold in the year 2000, so 17 years ago. And within 3 years, we lost 40% of our total employment in the region. So, thank you. An economy that was grounded in paper, and not only just a single industry, but really a single company. And so those cultural norms that accompany a one-company town, with a fair degree of benevolence over time, created some challenging cultural norms for us when our community was crying jobs, 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 and jobs that provided really significant living wage for families. What we recognized early on, and we were pretty traditional as an organization, we were a traditional community foundation. We were raising money and writing grant checks. And we realized in about 2002 or 2003 that that would not do what was needed in that community to help rethink what's going to happen, what is the economy going to be, how are we going to reinvent ourselves essentially, and really landed on the need to focus on culture. And that culture of moving away from a sense of dependency, of entitlement, multi-generations growing up and expecting to work in the paper mill, fairly insular, risk averse, right? So we weren't entrepreneurial. And I would say a high degree of concentration of power and control in the hands of few when you have a single company hierarchy. Headquarters is sold, it goes overseas, and the leadership structure really evaporated. And furthermore, the economic development infrastructure and anything related to workforce, et cetera, had all been in service of the industry, right? So it created this vacuum. And we really had to start from a clean slate almost, but recognize that if we did not work at the level of community and of the individuals living in that community in order to change to cultural norms of self-reliance, of a sense of agency, of a sense of control over their own future, that in fact it wouldn't matter what kind of built infrastructure came into that place, whether it was a bridge or a road. If you don't have the enabling cultural infrastructure and conditions there to capitalize on built investments, really is what our story is. So jobs, and we shifted to culture. And so I want to share, in terms of broadband, this story. We had fabulous broadband assets in our community, and we have had for over a decade. We have had top-notch Google fiber in our community, but we didn't know what to do with it because we really didn't have the economic infrastructure to think about or to support entrepreneurial activity. Right? What kind of support system is needed for entrepreneurs to grow businesses in that place? And the project I'm going to talk about today is specific, and isolate this to one thing, is a vacant newspaper building, Gannett newspaper building, that we bought in the middle of our downtown, which was not as vibrant as yours is today. The Wisconsin River runs through the center of downtown. The river had been a working river for over a century, used to make paper. River frontage controlled by the paper company because it produced electricity, et cetera. So very little riverfront development in our downtown. And then to the norm around who's making decisions and who's engaged in community in terms of understanding that users are involved in decisions that affect their lives. So we purchased this newspaper building. We hired a firm that specialized in not just architecture and design, but also in community organizing and engagement out of New Orleans. And they had done quite a bit of this post-Katrina. They came in and worked with us for 2 years. And the premise that we conveyed to the community when we bought the building was, we want you to decide what happens in this space. What do you, as the people that live in this community, want to have happen in this building in the middle of downtown? 2-year process, over 2,000 people participated, which is pretty remarkable given the size of our community. So our community, the region I serve, is about 45,000 people. The largest city, Wisconsin Rapids, is 18,000 people. So we had over 2,000 participate in this process. Came to the table with almost 1,000 ideas of what they wanted in this building, right? Over the period of 2 years and monthly meetings whereby individuals were learning skills and tools to build relationships and trust with one another, to understand how could we have deliberative dialogue around community decision-making process, et cetera. They arrived at a microbrewery that will, home brewers, a microbrewery that will actually apprentice home brewers. It will be the first training program in the state of Wisconsin for home brewers. It will have a cafe that highlights local food and local people, a culinary test kitchen, recreational rentals. So we'll have kayaks, stand-up paddle boards, et cetera, available. And it will have an overlay from Encourage and our support, which will be an entrepreneurial training program. So the Tribune for us really represents hope, and this is what the participants have said to us. It's in process right now, so we are raising money for the building right now. We're doing midpoint evaluations in terms of, we talk about and say this is about more than a building, right? It's about the process by which we're creating hope and helping individuals and institutions see the community with new eyes. So there are incredible assets in that community that heretofore have not been looked at as assets, right? Agriculture, natural resources, human potential, and innovation. Really, there was innovation there to start this paper industry and to be the head of R&D for a very long period of time. A deep trades in our area around electrical, welding, et cetera, that came as a byproduct of the paper industry. So let me get back on track here. Impact thus far, what it's doing in the downtown is it's spurring other investment, right? So it's having a catalytic effect in terms of the ability to source and receive riverfront development grants. We see additional activity on the part of private and public investors right now looking at opportunity in that area related to Tribune. And then I did say the midpoint survey from evaluators looks at, has the process actually changed behavior? And it has. So the people and residents that have participated in this process report a greater sense of optimism and hope around the future of the community, a greater likelihood to invest themselves locally, right? So it's not enough to call people to the table to ask them to participate. It's also about changing the norm of paternalism and external control to local control and ownership, and how do we foster those kinds of vehicles and avenues that will increase the greater sense of ownership structures like co-ops, et cetera. The Tribune itself, in terms of funding and the composition of funding, is philanthropic, so we have resources in there. The community itself has a goal of $1 million, and this is hard-fought money in that community, and small contributions like $5 to $5,000. Considering our average household income in the last decade has gone from $66,000 to $32,000, we thought $1 million was a reasonable goal, and they're at about $400,000 right now. We have unearthed and turned over just about every stone in the federal government in terms of looking for programmatic resources, and some people are here that have helped us look at those things. And you know that I envision we're not going to have a 3 by 3 by 12 foot spreadsheet when we're done, but it's not going to be too far from that, because that is the challenge in terms of weaving together resources in rural America and understanding what federal programs are available, what are the varying timelines or requirements of specific agencies, et cetera, and trying to get all of these stars to align. You need capacity on the other end of that on the ground that understands what's available. How could you even weave it together to make it work in the first place, right? And then how to leverage. Use philanthropy to leverage, use state resources, et cetera. So I think it's very complex, the whole funding aspect of it. National philanthropy, we have national philanthropies interested. And we're in the last 3 weeks of our state budget process, and we have a request in our state budget right now for the Tribune because it's about growing and investing in entrepreneurs. And Wisconsin doesn't necessarily do a good job of investing in startups and entrepreneurs. So the challenges, and then I'll go to my top two, and I'll probably be in my time frame here. Why is the Tribune important? And the challenges that keep it from happening in other places. So, I was meeting with one of the undersecretaries in rural development sometime in the last 2 years during this process, and he said every community in the nation needs a Tribune, right? Needs to find what their Tribune is. Where is it in Appalachia and other areas of the country that There's going to be a focus on the people from that place gaining a sense of agency, input into what they want their economy to be, and equipping with skills and tools to help make that happen, right? So authentic, user-centered process and ownership. The challenge is that is swimming upstream, in our case, in particular, against status quo. So the idea that the broad community, everyone should have a voice and be able to participate in shaping the future of the downtown runs counter to the old practice of a handful of individuals that were accustomed to making decisions that likely were well-intended, but really not broadly democratic in terms of inclusion. And that's our challenge, is it's disrupting the status quo. And when you're disrupting the status quo, not everyone is happy. Lastly, my top two pieces of advice on this is this idea of user-centered process and collaboration, right? So we heard collaboration across the board. Collaboration is an easy word to say. It is a difficult thing to do, and to do well. And to do either one of those things well, at the end of the day, I think the most important thing is that you yourself are authentic and congruent and modeling the behavior that you seek in others, right? So transparency, modeling values and vision is really important. And then lastly, I would repeat my opening comment, which was, all traditional infrastructure investments are really made more impactful when they're undergirded by strong cultural infrastructure or the enabling conditions in which those tangible, concrete infrastructure investments will thrive.
Wow, thank you, Kelly.
Oh, you know what? And I have a slide. Let me just show this real quick because I think it's pretty. There it is. So this depicts the Tribune building is this circular building on the left, the newspaper. Of course, paper industry in the background, which is still in production, but significantly less than what it was. And what this depicts is last summer, probably 6 years ago, as an organization, we decided a traditional annual meeting for us was no longer going to work when we were trying to foster more participation and inclusion in the community, that we wanted to do something in which everyone would be welcome. And so we started a community picnic and invited the entire community. And the first year we thought, well, maybe we'll have 500 people that'll show up. And we had 1,000. And we had a call from a local farmer that said, what can I bring to the picnic, right? And he brought roasting machines and a football team and roasted 1,000 ears of corn. That was the first year. This is last year. We had 7,000 people on the front here. And the whole purpose of the picnic is to meet someone that you do not know in that community, to get to know each other, to build trust. And that same farmer hit the 20,000 ears of corn mark this year. So this will be in August, and we expect we'll probably have about 10,000 people there.
That's great.
Wow. Kelly, you sort of yeah. You sort of touched on the issue of philanthropy a little bit, but from what I understand, a lot of times government, if you want a government grant, you have to supply part of the money yourself, right? So tell me about how philanthropy has helped you guys and maybe helped you get some grants that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
Sure. So I think philanthropy can play a significant role in infrastructure on many levels, right? I think philanthropy plays at the international level. It plays nationally. I'm part of the Council on Foundations, which is a national membership association, and there are philanthropic public liaisons that work with the federal government, specific departments, to say, how can we most effectively weave together USDA resources, EDA resources, et cetera, and use philanthropy on the front end in many cases to take risk that public sector does not early on. Philanthropy can test and look at new models for investment. So some of the things we were talking about earlier, like impact investing, using portions of our investment portfolios to think about how do we encourage and leverage more local investment. creating green bonds that might incent local municipalities and others to step into investment in place. I would say that we should get a good understanding, and I can't give you a statistic right now, though, of what national philanthropic dollars go into rural America, because I do think there's a reason that we had the kind of response in this last election that we did from many, many areas of the country that feel overlooked in some respect. And I think we need to reframe that narrative in terms of how we think about rural America or urban America. It is not either or, it is very much interdependence. And frankly, I mean, rural America provides the natural resource backbone and infrastructure. We should be looking at rural America as a solid infrastructure investment for the rest of the nation. So I know I went full circle on that, but I think there's a greater need for understanding how to effectively make grants and invest in rural America.
I think a lot of people, I didn't realize that a lot of government grants are contingent on getting some kind of private money, matching money. I want you all to be thinking of questions that you want to ask these folks, and not quite yet. We're gonna talk a little bit more, and then I'm gonna take questions from the audience. Also, folks online, #rural innovation, if you would like to submit a question. And just real quick before we get to the audience questions, Kelly, you had a chance to talk about this, but Eric and Barry and Justin wanted to hear about the top 2 pieces of advice that you all would give to community leaders who are trying to do what you're doing. What would your advice be, Justin?
I'd have to agree with Kelly, get the community involved, and we did that very successfully. Did a ton of planning. I think one night we had like 300 people in a room. We hung up the pieces of paper around, everybody put their ideas down, and we put that together, and it was community involvement. That community involvement created trust with local government officials, which I think is a little bit easier than trust at some other levels these days. But our community, I think, had great trust in the elected officials that were the liaisons with the funding agencies.
Eric, what are your top 2 pieces of advice?
Well, I'm going to agree with Justin on the planning. You definitely do a lot of planning and do a lot of your research in advance. And then I think both community and regional support, I talked about regional support earlier, but community support is very important. Having community buy-in in our broadband project allowed, during this last winter, in January, there were some really heavy winter storms. The power went out in Orleans for 5 or 6 days.
Several times.
More than once.
Over what time period?
Month of
Winter.
January.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, they had power about half the days of the month of January.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's cold in January.
It is very cold in January.
That's terrible.
Most people don't rely on electricity for heat down there. But in addition to that, the phones went out again. The local phone company, they got back up much faster than the power company. But when both the power and the phones were out, the community, including the volunteer fire department, relied on our broadband, and they used Facebook Messenger to communicate and to check on elders and to work on things. And having the community buy in and being prepared to do that, it's very vital, and it shows the benefits of having, if the community doesn't want it, it's not going to work. But if the community does want it, they're going to make it work in ways that you can't imagine.
Barry, anything you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to say, ask for help, because you don't always know what you're doing, but people are pretty receptive and pretty helpful if you ask them. And I think that it makes it easier for them. They're not going to just call you up. You've got to say, hey, how do we get broadband? How do we do this in our community? We want this. And people are pretty good about helping, so that's nice.
Who were the people, who did you ask?
Oh, I saw on some sheet some consultant who was working with the Yurok tribe, and so I gave him a cold call. I'd already talked to all the senators and talked to different people and tried every avenue, and finally I called and I said, hey, you're working with the Yuroks. It was John Irwin, and I said, maybe we can tag on. And so he started working with us and came out and visited, and he was really helpful. But just in general, I think I was at a broadband conference in Reading, and basically talked about how we needed help. And I think a lot of the other people were reluctant to approach tribes and felt like tribes were standalone governments, and I don't know, there wasn't much communication. And I think that asking for help does help.
Cold calls, I make them every day. Okay, audience members, the gentleman in the back who was first, can you say your name and,
Sure.
and where you're from?
Good afternoon. My name's Todd Wiggins. So I wanted to ask you, in reference to the broadband aspect, which is obviously very important as far as community and rural development is concerned, how much of it is tied into what goes on in the libraries? Because in many cases, that's where people have equal access to Wi-Fi or computers, et cetera. So is there an overlap with the mission of the, say, the American Library Association with expanding access to broadband and Wi-Fi?
I'd like to take that one.
Sure.
I'm the tribal library coordinator for the Kaduk tribe and have been since 2006. And we have a little community computer lab and library that's very helpful for our community because it's a safe place for our kids to go and access the internet. And so, and also with the Sipnook Digital Library, so we have our digital repository that has to do with the tribe, but we collaborate with the Humboldt County Library, who comes out with the bookmobile. I think libraries are one of the greatest assets for our communities for education and just entertainment and those kinds of things. And we've gotten a lot of support from IMLS, the Institute for Museum and Library Services. And I know that's one of the ones that's on the chopping block, and I'm really worried about that because that's been very supportive and very helpful for our community, because otherwise we don't have any library services. The nearest library services are also, an hour away or 2 hours to a big library.
Other questions?
We have an online question. When economic development requires infrastructure money, how do you keep community leaders engaged when they want jobs quickly?
Who wants
Jobs,
to
jobs,
take that one?
jobs.
Kelly, you're nodding.
Well, it's very difficult. I mean, even keeping them engaged in the kind of work we were doing early on, which was really about process and human relationships when Rome was burning, right? Was balancing, in our case, it was balancing that investment in building leadership capacity and trust in relationships with investing in existing business and looking at where were the growth opportunities in manufacturing, cranberries, et cetera. But looking for, I would go back to the infrastructure question, really is the shared value proposition and understanding what is the shared value proposition for individual, institution, and broader community, and then being able to articulate and understand that there are short, mid, and long-term strategies here, and you have to have all of them.
Justin, you want to say something about that?
I would just say that without the infrastructure development back in the early 2000s, we never would have gotten to the end game, which was, let's say, the hotel, which brought 90 new jobs to our community. And it was very difficult for people to say, well, why do you really need to fix the sewer system? Because it didn't impact them on a daily basis. But everybody that was involved at the government level saw, we need to fix this because you have to do that first before other things happen. So the infrastructure was critical to the jobs. And when you get the hotel, then we had all our storefronts were full, different new businesses were being started, different entrepreneurial businesses were being started. So it kind of is a teeter-totter back and forth for improvement.
So I think you're both saying, get people to try to look in the
Down the road.
long term, down the
Long term.
road. Other questions, this side? Say your name and where you're from.
Coming. You may be aware that a Washington Post reporter just wrote a book about Janesville, which has a similar situation perhaps with your town because Parker Penn and I think the auto industry closed there. And some of the discussion centered around the lack of help that Scott Walker and Paul Ryan, hopefully not related to you, looking out for their personal political interests and not for the state. And I just wondered what role have they had in helping infrastructure development? And also, I just wondered, you're not far from Wisconsin Dells, I believe.
Correct.
And I wondered if you could perhaps develop a less tacky version of the Dells as an alternative, perhaps.
Well, so a less tacky version of the Dells. We have this really incredible opportunity right now that has happened to us. And when I said Central Wisconsin, ag, paper, we are the largest production area of cranberries in the world. I have to say that. But also a large strip of sandy soil was cut when the glaciers came through, and it provided this really unique landscape. So just 2 weeks ago, we opened a new world-class golf course by the same owner that created Bandon Dunes in Oregon. It's fabulous, Sand Valley. It's world-class. I was just saying before, we have Lear jets and Airstreams coming in that have not previously, and the kind of potential economic impact for the region is pretty remarkable. And so that opportunity is between Wisconsin Dells and where I am. And lastly, I would say we are a nonpartisan organization. So we have to work well with all administrations and figure out how are we helping to grow business and what is business interest, but helping business see that it's good for their bottom line by investing in human capital and investing in community, right? So that has been the focus of our work. And so we may or may not agree with every policy that comes out of any given administration. And if it affects and directly affects the community, we'll take a position on it out of community advocacy. I have to say, there's been a receptiveness to the Tribune on the part of this administration that has been very encouraging to us.
Any lessons learned from Janesville?
Lessons learned
From Janesville.
in case you didn't
So
hear that.
Janesville had a General Motors plant. Janesville, Beloit had a General Motors plant. There's a lot of lessons from Janesville, from Flint, Michigan, which was auto industry again. Appalachia with coal communities. That I would say the lesson is, at the end of the day, it's about the culture that's been created in that place as a result of being dependent on a single industry. And that idea of creating a sense of agency and ownership in place is vital.
Remember, if you're watching online, #Rural Innovation, if you would like to, and do we have another online question?
We do. We have a couple, actually, but I'll to alternate here. This is a question for Justin, although I suspect all of the speakers could touch on this. For the jobs created in your infrastructure projects, what training and education was needed for the folks who were working on those projects, and any trouble finding workers with proper skills?
Great question, and it's kind of ironic that it gets asked, but when we created those 90 jobs in the hotel, there was a shortage of service workers that could provide them. The local community college created a curriculum for hospitality and tourism for that. And at the same time that we were growing the hotel, we had a great increase in our craft beverage markets in upstate New York. So we have 2 wineries, we have 2 distilleries and a brewery, and again, the community college created a curriculum for the craft beverage program. And the third component of some renewable energy in our area, where there was some windmills that were built in Lewis County, they needed to create, when the jobs were created for the people that were going to work there, the community college once again created a windsmith program so that there was people that could work in those industries. So it was changing, and they adapted to meet those economic and employment needs.
So again, community involvement, right?
Community involvement.
Yeah.
And I can't reinforce that enough, and I think everybody's talked about that, is community involvement. It's not one person's idea. It was great across the board for all of the communities.
Can I too
Kelly?
follow up on that in terms of skill set? So we have the same challenges in terms of workforce, skill set, and also available supply of workers. So we have a shortage right now. We have jobs available and not enough people to fill them. But for the last 10 years, again, to collaboration, we've coordinated a peer council of manufacturers in the region, small to mid-sized manufacturers. And they've come together regularly over the last 10 years to identify shared training needs and have created custom programs, so custom degrees at the technical college, certificates around manufacturing, food science, et cetera, where one of them might not have been able to do it by themselves, but when they can collaborate, even competitors at the same table, and create a custom, manufacturing supervisory 2-year degree that they created there because they needed it, and we could get scale by having them work together. It's now gone throughout the state of Wisconsin, and in most of the technical colleges is this some certificate and degrees that they've created themselves. That kind of collaboration around workforce has enabled them then to collaborate and advocate for wastewater improvements and infrastructure investments, right? Because it's created trusting relationships, and they've had some wins together around addressing worker skill and shortages.
Another question in the front here? And say your name and where you're from.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm consultant. To what extent
Bob Hershey, can you use the microphone?
Thank you. To what extent were you able to use the internet to get together people in the community and people putting up funding and get decisions on what to do and an economic consensus?
Who wants to tackle that one, Eric?
Sure. Well, before our project started, there wasn't internet access, so we weren't able to use the internet very well at all. Although people with satellite internet or dial-up internet did want to communicate, but most of our planning and our working together was physical, was meeting in the community. Since then, though, now that we have the internet, the tribal government is using it. They're talking about putting their tribal council meetings online. It's becoming used that way simply because they have it, and so it's in its infancy because we just started. We only got the internet just over a year ago, but now it is beginning, and we're seeing that happening.
Barry? Did you want to add anything? Very good. Kelly?
I just want to reference, so for 10 years we've had a partnership with the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, and they have done something called the Community Information Challenge. A lot of information on their website across the country in communities of all sizes in terms of access to information, the capacity to do something with it, and then engagement to what end. So a lot of different experimentation and examples of using the internet to foster not only informed but also engaged.
Justin?
We had the Development Authority of the North Country kind of supervises all of our government funded internet. And in Clayton, as the businesses started to come to the community, like the hotel, they needed big internet speeds that we weren't able to offer. And we did have, I should say, affordable. You can pay for anything if you're willing to, pay for anything. But we needed affordable internet, and through DANK, they helped us not only with our infrastructure, wastewater, sewer, but they also provided us as a conduit for internet in the northern New York region.
And sorry, Justin, what is DANK?
DANK, the Development Authority of the North Country. So it's a government entity that helps local government communities across geographical areas. So they've been very helpful to us.
So that's another option, a resource option is maybe there's a regional development authority that you don't know about. Those cold calls come in handy.
Yep.
Any other questions one from the web? And again, if you have a question on our web audience, the hashtag is rural innovation.
Hi, my name is Hiwat Gabramariam. I work for USDA Rural Development.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Hi, my name is Hiwat Gabramariam. I work for USDA Rural Development. You've all touched upon the importance of planning and community engagement. And I'm wondering if you have used these to choose the right type of infrastructure, including broadband, sewer system, to meet not only current needs of your community, but also future needs.
So how do you decide what type of infrastructure to build in the first place?
Right.
Anybody want to tackle that one? Kelly?
Well, some of it is driven by private investment, right? As an example, this golf course I just talked about. So that's driving infrastructure investments in our airport that we would not have seen previously. Broadband, in our case, was driven by private investment early on for an educational software company. I think it's a chicken or an egg kind of a question, right, in terms of identifying. And in this case, you identified what you didn't have and what you needed, right?
It's usually
Gap.
putting out fires, whatever we have to have or we're going under is what we go after next.
And I guess, go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, in our community, it was really community-driven in our case. I mean, a lot of people wanted the internet just to want the internet, but we had community members, community leaders saying, my children go off to college and they won't come home because they can't have internet at home. They can't have their jobs, they can't have what they've become used to out there when they come back. So it was, in our case, it was the children. They wanted to bring back their children as skilled workers to help the community. It was the medical clinic and the education and the schools that couldn't do what they wanted to do without this. So it was the needs really is what started our project.
Well,
And
I
I
just
guess-
wanted to say, though, that there's people who would love to live in our area. It's so beautiful, it really is. But if you don't have basic services, then people aren't going to come. So you need that. So it's.
And I guess in the case of Clayton, it was, well, we've got to get the sewer line fixed so that we can build the hotel.
Right. And we did that. That was in the village, and USDA was a major player there with their infrastructure, water sewer infrastructure. We have another sewer project that's going to connect an outside portion of the community, and USDA has been a huge player in that, along with Environmental Facilities Corporation. But with that infrastructure that we're investing in, we see the potential for future manufacturing opportunities in that geographic area, and hopefully we'll have the tools and the resources to bring those manufacturing opportunities into our community.
Other questions?
We have another question from the web, and related. For rural areas with declining population, how do you balance infrastructure investments with the risk of overdevelopment?
Overdevelopment. Justin?
Well, in our area, we've been fortunate because our population has been increasing, but I think that there needs to be that those risk takers to invest in infrastructure. And I think with infrastructure, you have the potential for increasing your population. And I think that's what happened in our community. We had good infrastructure. We had infrastructure that needed improving. We built on it. Our population started to increase. And we see that with more building permits, with more folk coming to our school districts.
But you're not a sprawling metropolis.
No.
So, Eric and Barry, did you all, I mean, did that, you don't want to lose the character of your community? I mean,
Yeah.
the internet obviously changes things.
It
Did
does.
you worry about that?
The tribal council actually expressed some concerns on that, and that's part of the reason I think it was important for the tribe to also take control of the internet access. The tribe is providing it, they're using it to reach the tribal members worldwide, and avoiding places where, culturally sensitive. By maintaining the Sipnic Digital Library, the restricted cultural information stays restricted. It's not out there for anyone in the world to see, so that the important, the sacred sites that we don't want people to just wander through, they're protected. Or, and the sacred cultural traditions can be protected. So you have to, part of it is the good plan, but also part of it is respecting and deciding in advance what you want to protect and what you want to develop.
So you have to plan.
And I was just thinking of, code protocols, how we want to provide the access, how we want to control the access. But from my own personal standpoint, it's just been, I did think about it. It was like, this is such a great place because we don't have all, the cell phone's not ringing, everybody's not walking down the road with, doing this. There's some really positive benefits to that, but it's also really nice to be able to make a choice and have the choice of, gee, I can do this. So.
You can really unplug. Yeah, you don't want to lose that. Kelly?
Yeah, I would say there's a growing level of awareness around the importance of community benefit as a lens in conversations about development, and a growing level of awareness around sustainable practices that there heretofore were not in that community. And so when that conversation comes from the community and they participate and have a voice in planning, you're looking at what's the long-term impact to community here, not just the short-term gain of jobs. And broadening that narrative and awareness of what kind of jobs are we looking for? Jobs at any cost? Or what are the related impact to development or job creation?
Other questions? In the front here? And don't forget to say your name. Oh, over there. You're next.
Hi, my name is Tyler Fish. I'm with the U.S. Small Business Administration. For Eric and Barry, I had a question. I was curious if you guys faced any unique legal or otherwise issues in implementing your project on tribal trust lands.
Well, our project was partially unique because it was partially on tribal trust land and partially not on tribal trust land. The Creek tribe doesn't have a traditional reservation. And honestly, it was because the project was on tribal land, it was on federal land, it was on state land. The challenges were very difficult just in the various permits. In some ways, it's a benefit to build on the tribal trust land because it's the tribe that is the land manager. But in the same sense, I had to go to the tribe's Natural Resources Board and convince them that the project was good. So in another way, they were just one more agency that we needed a permit from. And so it's it's partnership in this case. It's developing those partnerships with the various agencies. And the tribal trust land, I would say, always complicates the project, but it can have some benefits as well. And getting that tribal involvement is very important.
Barry, you want to add anything to that?
I was just going to say, we have also another project that's building on, going over to the coast, and it's going to go through National Park Service lands and, the Redwood National Forest. And so, yeah, it's complicated.
In the front here, and remember to say your name and where you're from.
Thanks. Eleanor Starmer, George Washington University, and previously USDA. Sounds like most, if not all of you, utilized some federal programs, and I'm interested in hearing your perspective on some of the things that worked well there, whether it was a specific program or a relationship that you had with someone in government, or maybe a role that federal folks played in your process, and then what some of the gaps were, maybe things that you just wish they could have funded but couldn't, or issues in the process that made things more challenging than they might have been.
You want to start, Justin? You're furrowing your brow. I knew you were thinking.
We had great relationships with all of our funding agencies. We did end up with a hiccup, and it was from HUD had a requirement that you have a federal Environmental Quality Review Act done. And in our case, the hotel had, through the village, had gotten a $750,000 grant for fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. So HUD wanted us to stop the project, no more construction, put a fence up, until we'd done a federal Environmental Quality Review Act, which was the same as the state Environmental Quality Review Act, and they said stop. And we were buying furnishings for the hotel. It wasn't that we were putting a hole in the ground with their funds. And so we were able to reach up to the governor's office through our connections and through the collaborative effort that we made, and we're able to switch some funding around to make that happen. But in the end, all of the agencies were very helpful, but a tremendous amount of paperwork. And Eric and I were talking about this earlier. We had to make sure that every T was crossed and every I was dotted. And that's why we had that huge spreadsheet to make sure that there was no duplication.
Do you still have that?
I do.
All right, next time I'm in Clayton, I
It's
want to
getting
see it.
legend status.
I think we scared,
Hang
that
it up on the
when
wall.
we went to Albany a couple of times, I think we scared people when we rolled that out in front of them.
That's great. Eric, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, our project, when we started, just, back when we started looking for funds ourselves, 2011, and in this modern time, there was funding for broadband, but not for phones. So we still have phone problems, but I'm not allowed to build phone circuits with the federal funds. So I can only build internet. So that's what we're doing, is we're building internet. Also in the challenges, about halfway through our project, we identified a cheaper and more effective way to provide internet to the whole community. But it was a change. And our project stalled for over a year, and we ended up in an audit situation where we had to convince them both fiscally and project-wise that this change was beneficial, and it stalled our project. It just stopped dead. We couldn't spend another dollar until we convinced the federal agency that the change was worth it. So the inflexibility of the programs, if you can work within the guidelines, the funding is great. And the instant you need the slightest little leeway or step outside the bounds, the whole thing stops.
Oh. Barry, did you live through that?
Yeah,
Yes.
lived through there. But I wanted to say Connie Stewart was very helpful, and she brought out NPR one time, and they interviewed us on our lack of broadband and also the lack of broadband across native country. In tribal lands, we have, if you drive across the country, you go through tribal lands, you go through a black area of broadband availability. And so through that, Jeffrey Blackwell was just being interviewed on that same radio show, and he had just been hired at the FCC for native policies because they'd recognized that same fact that tribal lands had less broadband accessibility. And so I was bringing the 8th graders out here we had 3 8th graders that year, for their end of the year trip. And so we called the FCC and Jeffrey Blackwell's office, and they invited us in, and the kids were able to wear their hats and talk about how they really wanted broadband and how they really wanted that for our area. And he came out and visited us, which was the first time that the FCC has ever been out to our area. And I really felt like having that department acknowledge us and be aware of us, have us on the map, was helpful to our project. And so, yeah, I'd like to see that agency stay in place too, and I think that's a scary thing too.
Kelly, you want to add anything? You're taking notes furiously.
I do, actually. I have a few things I want to say. So that's a great question. Thank you. I think helpful things that the federal government has done, or in terms of accessing resources, in the last several years, intentionality around, on the part of agencies and departments, collaborating to jointly issue NOFAs. So departments aligning their metrics and coming together to allow those of us that are working on the ground to access programs that have components of education, workforce, et cetera, much easier, instead of trying to figure out who's doing what on that spreadsheet on our own on the other end, right? The other thing that was interesting, and I saw positive impact, was post-Katrina in New Orleans, embedding what was called a navigator in the city of New Orleans mayoral office on the part of the federal government. And it was a position that was just to navigate federal programs and resources and figure out how to leverage them for New Orleans needs, to partner with Philanthropy, state capital, et cetera. And I know there were some thoughts about navigators then in other cities, but that idea of having some kind of dedicated knowledgeable liaison would be invaluable, I think, in place. Innovative things in USDA like Uplift, which was Lisa Mensa's team, and thinking about how to use capital and get more capital that's designated for rural areas, but it's not quite getting there, right? So what are the challenges in getting that capital into place? And pretty innovative thinking about bringing philanthropy in, using CDFIs to get into facilities. Having a designated council, the rural council, to think about all the multiplicity of issues in rural. And now the hindrance. I think the biggest hindrance, in my opinion, is that rural is treated as a subsidy program in the federal government. It is not, it's within the USDA, and it's funded in large part through the Farm Bill, right? And we have to change that. We have to change the way that rural is funded. I know that's a big, broad statement, right? Like, good luck, Kelly. But it's buried, right? And, you know, there's aspects of rural funding within HUD. There's aspects of rural funding, but you have to seek it out if you don't know that it exists, right? And finally, I would say, you know, another thing is thinking differently in rural areas. We're having some challenges with being able to accept rural economic development money for renovation and construction because of the requirements on what contractors we must use because of federal guidelines. We want to be able to subdivide and build capacity locally with local contractors, and we're not able to do that if we take some of these specific kinds of money. So instead of building capacity locally, and the last thing I'll say is the hindrance, another hindrance would be, in my opinion, eliminating an undersecretary for rural development, unless there's a plan to elevate rural to a much higher position and discussion as being integral, really, to the future of the nation.
And unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, everyone. And Janet has just a few more things to say, and then
Sure.
we'll be done.
And I want to add one interesting thing that we always note ourselves, those of us who do a lot of work in rural, but may not be obvious to folks, that what we have here is 3 different stories, 3 different kinds of infrastructure, and 3 different kinds of intermediary. We have here a community foundation, we have a tribal government, and we have a township. And in other rural communities, it might be a CDF, a Community Development Financial Institution. It might be the local economic development agency. It might be the United Way. I mean, you know, it's very different in each rural community. Who is the intermediary who's going to get something done? So the other thing I would say about federal programs or state programs is a lot of them go to a certain intermediary, which doesn't exist in every rural place. Mm-hmm. So flexibility around who is the mover and shaker intermediary is a very important thing to understand in rural America. So that's my little comment. How's that? So I want to thank you all for coming today, those of you in the room, as well as those of you who are live streaming or watching this after the fact. We're going to take a few months break now from the America's Rural Opportunity Series, only because we know how many people disperse for their summer priorities. And so I want to underline something that we say at the end of each one of these, is that we know that a healthy and more prosperous America requires a healthy and prospering rural America. And that won't happen unless we pay close attention to the range of innovation that's going on, honor it, support it, and accelerate it. And so that's what we want to do. Please be on the lookout for when we resume the Aero series this fall. Till then, I do want to thank Justin Taylor, Eric Cutright, Barry Talley, and Kelly Ryan, as well as Nancy Marshall-Genzer. Have a happy, healthy, and productive summer.
I can't have fun up in New York. I'm sure I'm seeing you somewhere.